I just moved to the D.C. area, taking a job at the Pentagon, where national defense policy is developed, a stone's throw across the Potomac River in our national seat of government. There was hardly a cloud in the sky that morning, and as I made my way up the stone steps, I noticed how they had been worn smooth by the millions who, since 1951, had trudged up them. I skipped up them, giddy like a schoolgirl. Today was important because I had my first press interview with the general officer that I'd set up and prepared. Just before 9 a.m., a plane flew into one of the Twin Towers in New York. The media suggested it may have been deliberate. What mayhem could have taken place inside that plane to cause a crash like that? Thinking it must have been a medical emergency, I came to the front of the desk where we monitored all the news across the national networks. And I watched in shock and disbelief, as many of you did, as that second plane flew into the second tower. Any doubt this was deliberate was completely erased. America was under attack. The Pentagon could be a target too. I considered that for a fleeting moment, went back to my desk and finished up a phone call. But no sooner had I laid the phone in the cradle than that third plane hit the Pentagon. The building and all 6.5 million square feet shook, jarring everyone inside. I heard the metal blinds banging against the window pane as my eyes registered their movement, and I instinctively ducked under my desk. Then I, along with 28,000 people, began spilling out of the nearest exit. And as we did, I saw thick black smoke pouring over top of the building. Traffic was at a standstill. Everything stopped as the plane, the building, and those inside were engulfed in flames. It was chaos, a living nightmare. I found myself at the epicenter of one of the darkest days in American history, September 11th, 2001. Over 3,200 people died at the hands of the terrorists that day. And honoring those who fell victim to al-Qaeda, the U.S. and 31 NATO nations altered their diplomatic approach and stepped into a sovereign nation to ferret out the terrorists within. NATO had the blessing of Afghanistan's leaders, the resources to bear, and offered a real chance at liberation. But what does it truly take to liberate a country from the grip of terror? The global community believed that military intervention, nation building, and could uproot deep-seated oppression and foster freedom. Counterinsurgencies are complex, though, and liberating a country from insurgents, transforming the very hearts and minds of the people who live there, takes more than a generation to take root. Afghanistan taught us a painful truth. Liberation cannot be imposed. It must be cultivated from within. I learned that firsthand in the most vivid way imaginable. As a young Air Force officer, I believed in the promise of change, yet over the years I came to understand how profoundly complex liberation is, especially in a country like Afghanistan that had been at war for decades and where radical Islam is woven into the very cultural fabric. Afghanistan became my classroom, teaching me the fight for freedom demands more than sound strategy and ample resources. Between 2006 and 2007, I was the voice and face for NATO's International Security Assistance Force in Kabul. We put out news releases and held press conferences about NATO's effort. Troops in contact, targeting key Taliban leaders, all while building roads and training our Afghan counterparts for 20 years. I ask you, what would you do if you came face to face with a terrorist? Malala Yousafzai was a 15-year-old Pakistani girl the Taliban shot at point-blank range in the head for the crime of being a girl who dared attend school. Her father knew what education brought to those who possess it and opened an all-girls school so that little girls would have what every little boy had, opportunity. And in 2014, at the age of 17, Malala became the youngest Nobel Peace Prize laureate. That attack made her, now a 27-year-old woman, a global symbol for Afghan women's rights. Speaking to leaders in my career, I encourage them to step into their crisis and own their narrative. Malala has done just that, courageously scoffing at the terrorist. Hers is a powerful story of individual liberation against oppression. Like hers, my father told me, get your education because once you have it, no one can take it away from you. Yet in Afghanistan, that is precisely the case. In 2021, within months of the American withdrawal, the Afghan National Army collapsed under a Taliban offensive. 2 decades of diplomacy, trillions of dollars, and thousands of lives erased in an instant. Last fall, Malala, along with actress Jennifer Lawrence and director Sarah Mani, released a documentary, Bread and Roses, exposing the plight of Afghan women today. After living as a liberated society for 20 years while NATO snuffed out the terrorist within, women in Afghanistan are once again brutally tortured and publicly punished. Malala calls it gender apartheid as she continues to champion Afghan women's rights. Malala explains that in that culture, every man is your brother, every woman your sister. So how do you reason with a family member, an extremist, who's been told the taking of a life in the name of Allah assures them a place in paradise? Quite simply, you won't. And oftentimes, those wielding weapons and instilling terror can't even read. See, the Watson Institute compares literacy rates related to gross domestic product, an indication of a nation's economic health. Afghanistan's literacy rate is only 37%. Naturally, it's mostly men. Compared with neighboring Pakistan, whose rates top 58%, and GDP per capita stands at $5,400, nearly 4 times that of Afghanistan. The very future of Afghanistan hinges on whether or not it can invest in women's education, elevating them in society once again. You see, even the extremists know that education is the single element that can lift the powerless from poverty. Just like my father told me, and Malala's told her. These extremists, now fearful for losing their power and control, have forbidden women from even speaking with their mothers, sisters, or friends. Women in Afghanistan are now neither seen nor heard. It is not hopeless, though. Cracks are beginning to emerge in the very rigid interpretation of Islamic law used to justify the oppression of the 20 million women imprisoned there. Some religious leaders are questioning the status quo. This shift offers an opportunity for women in Afghanistan to once again be recognized for their inherent dignity. If this shift is nurtured, it could lead to their liberation, allowing all women to live fully as the human beings they were born to be. Many of you drive a car regularly. You attend sporting events, go to church activities, you go out to eat at your favorite restaurants with family and friends. You have the liberty to pursue that which makes you happy, that which brings you joy. What if those essential elements of your individual liberty were stripped away? Imagine you were forced to cover yourself from head to toe, could go nowhere alone, and were forbidden from making a single sound. If an Afghan woman were your mother, your sister, your friend, would you lift her up to hear her voice? I encourage each and every one of you to tell one person in your circle of influence about what you know now. And share #StandWithWomen in Afghanistan on social media and draw attention to their urgent cry for help. You see, we all have a choice. Women in Afghanistan have little. And if we don't stand with women in Afghanistan today, we may face a new generation of radical extremists threatening our world. This is not just an Afghanistan issue. It is a global human rights issue. Liberate Afghan women once and for all. And thank you for standing with Afghan women today.